Hi, I'm Elisa, and welcome back to my channel. Just diagnosed 2 weeks ago with autism, um, ADHD, which I'd already known about, bipolar 2, again, already knew about that, and then also generalized anxiety disorder, no surprise, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So that was what I walked away from my neuropsychological testing with. And so at first I was going to kind of focus in on each one of those and kind of say like how they impact me or how they show up in my life. And I did that for OCD. I kind of made like one video focusing on OCD. But then as I tried to do that for, let's say, bipolar or ADHD or autism or any of those, they just were all so like overlapped with one another that I couldn't really pull out and say, okay, well, these are the traits for this, or these are the traits for this, because everything kind of works together. So instead, what I did is I took these diagnoses and I went into Chat GPT and I wrote, can you find the intersections between the following disorders? And then I figured I'd just kind of hone in on one. Like today, I thought I'd talk about like sensory sensitivities and just kind of focus there. So, just to get off on the beginning, I'll tell you what those seven things were. So, the seven things that it said were intersections were executive functioning difficulties. Sorry, I have it on a post-it right next to me. Emotional dysregulation, repetitive thoughts and rumination, hyperfocus and obsessional patterns, social difficulties, sensory sensitivities, and sleep disturbances. So all of those can be impacted by all five of these. And when it broke it out for me, it kind of did it by like saying like, okay, for executive function difficulties, like all five of them are affected. But on some of them, it'll say like only like this one doesn't have OCD as much then. So, and then it just kind of breaks them down. So I just found that helpful and interesting because to me, I want to understand how everything is working in my brain. And so after I did that, I also put in asking it, let's see what my other question was. I said, what are the parts of the brain impacted for each, and how do their functions overlap? And so that started breaking down like the actual parts of the brain, like your prefrontal cortex and different things like that, and kind of showing how each of those are impacted by each of the diagnoses. And so I'm not going to get into that right now. I'm still doing my research and trying to like compile it and make sense in my own head of all of that. But it's just helpful. That's how my brain works. Like I want to understand like all of the like small details and exactly how it works. That way I can better like have a visual mental picture of what's going on. My daughter and I were talking yesterday. We were driving to somewhere. And as we were driving, we started talking about like ADHD um and she was telling me how she has a hard time because she focuses in on every small detail. And so we kind of used the analogy and looked at it as like someone who, let's say, goes outside and they look out and they see a forest. And so to them, they see a forest. But for somebody who is more of like the someone who notices all of the small details. Like they go out there and they pay attention to like the leaves and how these leaves are different colors than these leaves and how this tree is formed and how these ones are leaning. And so all of these different small details. And then finally they can walk away and say, okay, all of those details equal a forest versus seeing the forest and not the details. And so we were just kind of talking through some of that. Like she was pointing out how license plate, she was kind of curious how, how like sometimes they have like the first three or maybe like letters and then a dash and then the numbers. And she was saying how I know it's usually like 3 and 4. She's like, but sometimes they switch those and they usually have a dash. She's like, but sometimes they don't have a dash. And so she was like, I understand if it's one of those like personalized plates or whatever, that it wouldn't have that. But she saw one of the plates that had just a row of numbers all stuck together. And she's like, but why is it like that? And so we were just kind of talking through, like, again, as we were driving about all of these different things that like we focus in on, that maybe other people don't get bothered by. So when I was reading and I was doing some of this research, one of the things was, like I said, the sensory and physiological sensitivities. And so the way I kind of was thinking about this, I don't know if this is right, so don't quote me on this, but I was thinking like sensory is almost like what's happening in our outer experience. So like everything coming in at us versus like physiological is like our inner experience, like what's going on inside of us. Um, that is a sensitivity, whatever. Um, so I just figured I would kind of talk through some of mine. Because maybe you can relate, or maybe you have other ones that I didn't think of, or whatever. Actually, why I decided to go get tested for autism, because I was finding, which I say this in other videos, so I'm not going to go all into it, but I was finding that I had like my bipolar taken care of, I had my ADHD taken care of, and there was still a whole bunch of stuff that kept popping up. And so a lot of these were like a lot of the sensory sensitivities. And so that was just something that kind of led me down that road towards autism. Um, Okay, so some of my things that bother me are competing noises. So yeah, noises, loud environments, like all of that can be too much. But when there are a bunch of competing noises, so like if we are sitting there and I'm watching TV, but I have my daughter over here who's on her phone, my other daughter who's doing something, and my husband who's watching his phone. And so there's these noises, then like our dog barks. And so if there's just too much coming at me at one time, I have a really hard time like processing all of that. And so I just kind of need it to like slow down. Yeah, it's funny because other times, maybe that's when like my ADHD brain is like way in control. Because other times I feed off of the chaos and like I do better when there's more things going on. Because if there's less things going on, then I kind of just get bored in my own head. Anyways, all right. So that's competing noises. Another thing noise-wise that bothers me are like small noises. So let's say I'm watching TV and someone is listening to their phone on the other side of the couch. And as they listen to their phone, it's like turned way down. So I can just kind of like hear these little like whispers, or can kind of like, if I really tune in, I can like hear what they're saying. That is really hard for me because my brain will try to focus in on that. And so when it's too low, like it'll try. So instead of then I lose track of what I'm actually listening to, and my ears just want to like focus in and try and like, what's that word? Make it bigger. Like, whatever. It like becomes more of a thing. So that's one because it's like barely audible. And so my brain wants to like take that in. So that I have a hard time with too. Like either have it be loud or quiet or whatever. Um, Another thing are just like random noises of like electricity or sorry, I hear my fridge right now when I say that. Um, or this one time I remember I was at Barnes and Noble, and you know how on some of their packages, like their anti-theft devices, the little like black circles, well, sometimes if they're low on their battery, they start making like these weird like clicking sounds. And I remember one time being in the store shopping, and that's all I could hear. And I don't know if like a couple of them were like the battery was dying on them or what, but like that's all I could hear. And it sometimes when I hear a noise, then it kind of like amplifies itself. And so it becomes like the only thing in my head. Difficulty sometimes with auditory like processing when I remember this was really bad when I was a teacher. Like sometimes someone would say something to me and I would be right like face to face with them. And so I could see their mouth moving, I could hear the words coming out, but like my brain just couldn't compute and like put it all together to make sense. And so I'd have to like have them repeat it and repeat it and repeat it because it's like for some reason like my brain just wouldn't like latch on to the words, and so they would just kind of get lost. So that's something I kind of struggle with too, especially if I get put on the spot or anything like that. Like I just kind of um have difficulty, but that's a different thing. I just have a hard time with. Um but with that, like I would say with the mouth sounds with my dog, pardon me. Um Sorry, she's laying on the floor right there. So I had to look at her. Um, is not only like the mouth sounds, but like slobber is something that real I have a really hard time with slobber. And so all of my animals know like I don't do licking, and so like they won't lick me. But it's one of those where like my husband is always like, a dog's mouth is cleaner than blah 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 blah. And I'm like, I don't care. I've seen that dog licking its butt and I don't want to get licked by that. So yeah, that just bothers me. I can't handle any of that stuff. Um Another thing that I can be sensitive to are lights. So I tend to, when I was a teacher, I didn't use the overhead lighting. I just had a bunch of lamps around in my room. And that's what we have in our house too. Like we have our overhead lights, but hardly ever turn those on. Instead, I have like five little lamps around here that I just kind of turn on. And I like that ambiance and the like soft glow of that better than like the I don't know, just the overwhelming like upper light. Um, Also, if things are so like visually overstimulating, so if I go somewhere and there's just too much stuff, then it's like my brain is trying to take all of it in at once and it has a really hard time like finding what it needs to focus on. But yeah, so back to some sensory stuff. Our clothing. So clothing is something that like obviously like tags can't handle tags. And even every once in a while, like I'll notice, like if I were to get something and put it on and not realize like the tag is there, that even if I can go for like a good portion of the day, that it's still aggravating because then by like, let's say midday, that is all I can feel is this tag. And it's almost like it makes your skin like crawl and it's just not good. And so most of my tags are either cut out or I tend to buy a lot of like thrift store clothes. And so a lot of those tags are already gone for some reason, but they are. And so yeah, or I just have to cut them out. And then another one is like itchy stuff. I cannot handle itchy. So I do like soft, cozy things, but I also love fashion. And so I love to go find unique things. And so sometimes those textures aren't necessarily like the most comfortable, but if it's like something I like, I can usually deal with it. But there are certain things, like I remember I wanted recently a green sweater because I have so much green, but I didn't have just like a green cardigan. And so I went to Goodwill and I was looking around and I found one and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I've been looking for. And so I bought this green sweater, so excited. And I came home and tried it on and I was like, a little itchy, but probably just needs a wash. And so I put it in the wash and then I tried to wear it. I just couldn't do it. Like it felt like the fabric was sewn with tinsel and like intermixed within the fabric and it was just horrible. And I tried pushing myself to just like handle it, but I couldn't. So it went back into like my pile of clothes to be donated. Um, but yeah, so that's that. Then what else? So touch is something that it's funny because I'm a very like touchy person in the sense like I give my girls like hugs and kisses and like all the time and I'm like rubbing their backs or tapping their leg or whatever just to kind of like show them that I'm here and I love you. Um and but I can't stand like I don't mind being touched, but I can't have my face touched. Like that, I don't know if it's because it's almost like a claustrophobia thing, like someone gets too close to my face and I'm just like but and really it's kind of hypocritical because I like constantly want to rub my girls' cheeks and give them kisses all over their cheeks. And I'm like, okay, that's kind of rude because I don't want them touching my face. I mean, granted, if it's like a kiss, fine, but I don't want just my face being touched. And then um and I think part of that is like it's funny because my grandpa on my mom's side used to be the same way. Like I would be able to like cuddle with him on the couch and stuff like that and lay on him, but you don't touch his face. And so I always thought that was such like a strange rule. And now look at me. So whatever. Um, I also though was diagnosed like many, many years ago with fibromyalgia. And so with that, it's just my skin tends to feel like it's bruised a lot, like at all times. So if I were to, let's say I'm walking, because I bump into things all the time. Let's say I'm walking into the other room and I'm like trying to make it through the door frame, but I don't like quite judge that properly. And so I just smack like the door with my arm. Not even a hard hit, like just kind of bump it, right? It will feel like I just got punched, like as hard as probably not as hard as someone possibly could, but it feels like I got punched and it feels like there's a bruise. And so a lot of the times my skin feels bruised. I would go for I have like a few tattoos and I really want some more tattoos, but That's part of what's holding me back is my fibromyalgia because, like, for instance, I would get it here, something, but I can't because my upper arms are like, even me just doing that, like, I can kind of feel it. So I'm like, maybe I could get in there and they start and I'd be okay. And it would kind of like, I get into the zone and kind of don't even feel it. But I'm afraid like I would go to get one and they'd like hit it with a needle once and I'd be like, nope, can't do it. Um, so yeah. So instead I have to get like tattoos on like my forearms and stuff like that. But that's that. Then what's another one? Smells. So smells are kind of like sometimes I can smell really good, sometimes I can't smell for anything. And it's funny, once I had both of my girls, my sense of smell really kind of deteriorated. Um, and so part of that is like an example of that is I cannot smell mustiness to save my life. I couldn't. And we will have like sometimes, in the wash, if you like leave your clothes in there too long and then you throw it in the dryer. So now I know, like if it's been like a day and a half to 2 days, it's got to get rewashed. But before I was always like, well, it smells fine to me. And then my husband would like smell me or one of my girls and be like, oh my goodness, that's so musty. And so I wouldn't know. So I'd have to go back through all of the drawers that I put stuff away and like pull all the things that I had recently put in there. And then he'd have to be my like sniffer to like smell all of these musty clothes, which he hated because apparently it's not a good smell. And for me, though, like he could say, yes, this is musty. And I would take it and put it up to my like face and do like this deep breath. Still couldn't smell it. Like it still smells fine. So I always joked that I needed like a sign on the back of my clothes or like my girls' clothes that say like, if my clothes smell musty, just tell me because I can't smell it, or my mom can't smell it, or whatever. Another thing though, smell wise, that I think is kind of just odd is um, so me and my husband, we have been married for 20 years, but our first 3 years of our marriage, we lived apart from each other. So I lived in New Mexico and he lived in Alaska. And when I finally got out of the military and left New Mexico and I moved up to Alaska, after a little while of living together, and I just thought, okay, well, maybe he eats a lot of garlic and I don't know. But he like I swore like garlic was just coming from his pores at all time. I thought he must put garlic in like every single thing he eats. And now I think it was just some way of like warding me off, but it didn't work. Um, but yeah, it was so overpowering, but nobody else could smell it. Like I would ask people because it was so overpowering, and I'd be like, tell me, does he smell like garlic? Which is probably annoying to him, but does he smell like garlic? Because that's all I can smell. Nope, they couldn't smell it. So I don't know what that was, but whatever. Um, Another thing is like temperature. Um, I always joke that I'm very like a fair weather person. Like I like spring and I like fall, and I don't really like the extremes either way. And so if I'm too hot, like I will be in a bad mood. If I'm too cold, I'll be in a bad mood. So, let's try and keep it pretty even killed. And then my most recent sensory thing that I've been struggling with, and this really is a struggle, is food texture. So I go through this every once in a while where I kind of will like zone in on my food textures and get kind of bothered by it. But I would say recently it's been pretty bad to the point where like I'll take a few bites and I'll be okay. But like once it's in my mouth, then all of a sudden it's like I become conscious of the feeling of it in my mouth. And I have a really hard time like swallowing it or like taking it in. And so yeah, so it'll kind of like I'll eat a few bites and then I'll be done. Or really like I've always said like I could probably become like a vegetarian um because I love pasta. But but because I think another part of that is also just that's a nice fuzzy. The way my brain works is like when I'm eating meat, for instance, like I'll be fine and I'll be eating my burger and I'll be all good and whatever. But then it's like all of a sudden the thought will come in my head about like this animal. And so that's all I can then think about is like, this was like part of its body and I'm eating it and whatever. So I gross myself out. Same with like, this isn't really related, but it still is me grossing myself out, is like shrimp. I can only eat maybe like 4 to 5 shrimp. And when we get to that like sixth shrimp, I'm done. Because by that sixth shrimp, like I no longer am thinking that, this is delicious shrimp. Instead, I'm thinking, there's usually like a line of poop down their backs. And then that's all I can think about is that I'm like eating something with its poop. And so yeah, so I just get in my own head and like get weird about stuff. But those were just some of my sensory sensitivities. And it's funny. So, not funny, but I've been watching a lot of like near-death experience. And that's really helped me a whole bunch, which in another video, I kind of talk about like existentialism and like my fear of like dying and all of that kind of stuff. But watching these near-death experiences has been so helpful because it really kind of it takes away some of the fear that I had. But anyways, to my point to that was I had come across this one woman, which if I find the link, I can add it. But she was talking about like ADHD and spirituality. And she just kind of had put this connection together that she was saying, that we are spiritual beings and like here on earth, we are physical beings. But that, it makes sense that that when we move down to the earth plane that we have to like ground ourselves and that we have a hard time with that because some things like for instance time doesn't exist in other realms and so she's saying like okay ADHD time blindness or different things like that and so she was just saying that it's funny that a lot of these like sensory sensitivities are things that, have to do with like the nuance of touch or smell or taste. And that those are all things that like only exist on this plane. Um, and so neurodivergence is just like this inability to fully like acclimate to the earthly plane. I don't know, whatever. It was really interesting and I'd like to hear more about that. And I love learning. So yeah, so if any of you guys have thoughts on that, because I didn't really explain that very well, but it was interesting when she said it. Um, And yeah, so that's, I guess, all I have to talk about for today is just some of the sensory sensitivities. And, let me know if maybe you struggle with the same things or you struggle with other things that I didn't mention. Um, and I'm sure I have so many more, but I just made a quick list of stuff. Um, yeah, so thanks for listening and for watching, and I hope to hear from you.